Yes.
Hello, hello, everyone. Let's give it a few minutes for people to come in. Good to have all of you here today. We're going to start shortly. For those of you who are in, feel free to put in the chat, say hi, put your favorite emoji or how you're feeling today, say hi to us, who you are. Now we've got a number of people also from the Change Transformation Organization Design Conference in New York last week. So to those of you who are here, so great to see you last week, and big welcome to the session. And now we're going to talk about something today that many of you have a lot of questions around, and many of you are going through this at the moment. So I'm very, very excited to have this conversation. So we'll start in about 45 seconds or so, just giving people a chance to come in and get ready, and then we will kick it off shortly. Hello from Los Angeles. Hello, Los Angeles. I'm also in Los Angeles. Great to see you. People from around. People coming in one by one. All right. Big welcome, everyone. Big welcome to the session. Great to see you here and have you here. All of you are pretty much familiar with the Executive Council for Leading Change. For those of you who are not, we are an industry association for senior change and transformation leaders. And this webinar series is part of what we do to share best practices, insights, awareness around many of these topics that I know many of you are going through today. I was just chatting with Laura before this, that in the conference we attended last week, there was so many of you that were saying that I'm going through this right now. I've just been tasked with this, setting up a transformation office. I'm just tasked with building this capability. I've never done it before. I have no idea what I'm doing. So I think this session is very, very well timed to share from Laura and see how she actually did it, because she's done it. And she's done it before and building it for Ulta Beauty. So it's going to be a case study today and walking through how she did it. So starting with who's Laura, very, very happy to have you here. Laura Perez, who started in financial services originally, which is an interesting background to come into it. And I think many have that in common, that they're coming from very different backgrounds, not necessarily from a transformation background, which makes it even more interesting. And then Laura went into consulting, where she really honed her skills in growth, transformation strategies, and then joining retail. So about 2 decades of experience, and right now she's the Vice President of Merchandising, Strategy and Growth at Ulta Beauty. And what she's here to talk about today is how she actually created and led Ulta Beauty's enterprise transformation. So she was shaping and building the transformation office, started from scratch, coming from the PMO side of the business originally, and then building it out to 35 headcount, which I know many in the audience will be like, wow, like I want that headcount. How do I get that capability to drive the transformation I'm tasked with? She's also spearheaded initiatives like Conscious Beauty, emphasizing sustainability, transparency. So that was a special initiative that she drove for Ulta as well. And today, also beyond her corporate role, she also serves on the board of directors for Nanophase Technologies and Youth Guidance. So reflecting her passion for both business and community outside of her full-time work as well. So with that, Laura, thank you so much for being here with us. So grateful to have you have this chat. I think it's very relevant and very timely.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So let's start a bit with you. Beyond this introduction, like tell us, how did you end up being the one to set up Ulta Beauty's transformation office? How did you get picked into that role from a non-transformation background?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say there's kind of 2 factors that led to it, right? One is me, right, in my experience, but the other is Ulta and where the company was at the time. And I think, you know, for leaders out there looking to build a transformation office or a capability around transformation, it is very important. And one of the things that I think you'll hear from me today for the case study for Ulta Beauty is to really understand the company, the company strategy, the company maturity, and kind of what you're looking to achieve and where you are kind of in that life cycle as a company. So to answer your question, my background, and you touched on it a little bit. I had some transformation in my background from my time in consulting, but when I joined Ulta Beauty, I actually was a director in corporate strategy. So I had a really deep understanding of the company and what we were trying to achieve, kind of the financial algorithm that drove the company, the growth of the company. I had been at the company when I took the transformation role for about 4 years. I led I guess a little less than 4 years. I've been at Ulta Beauty a total of 6. And so I'd seen the company when I joined grow from like 6 billion to, we hit about 10 billion a couple of years ago. We're now an $11 billion company. So just really rapid growth. So I'd seen a lot of how the company was growing and what we were focused on. I then during COVID started leading our PMO, and basically it was a bit of a rebuild, a rebrand of our PMO. We had a PMO that was functioning well, but it was very focused on smaller projects that weren't super transformational. And we needed to pivot based on where we were and how fast the company was growing and scaling to really focusing on bigger, more strategic programs. And what our leaders were looking for were more of that thought partnership, that driving capability, that blend of strategy and execution, that right-hand person who could really guide kind of and chart the course for, whatever it was we were looking to do. Transformational system that was going to change the way our people were working, for example. And what does that mean? And how do you develop a roadmap and all those sorts of things? So I had kind of proven my ability to deliver kind of new programs through director of corporate strategy experience. And you mentioned Conscious Beauty, that was one of them. I also then had kind of the credentials of, well, she actually can execute as well, leading the PMO, leading some of these larger kind of executional initiatives. And so when it was time, and when I had looked at the portfolio as I was leading the PMO, and it was a team of 6 at the time, I saw what was coming. And it was an ERP transformation, a data transformation, a digital transformation, a supply chain transformation, all at the same time. And I looked at my tiny team of 6 and I said, well, this is not gonna work. Like the math doesn't quite add up. And so I would say, I landed in it because I frankly looked at kind of where we were. I looked at the risk that all of those really large transformations were posing to the company because we were investing a lot in those. We needed to get kind of out of them what we had said at the beginning of these initiatives we were going to get out of them: better processes, more efficiency, unlocking really the foundation of growth for Ulta Beauty going forward, and building some new capabilities for us to be able to continue to grow. And so I started laying that out, and I had some meetings with our leadership team, and I just said, I think this is what we need. This is what we're up against. Here's where I see our team playing today, but this is the gap that I see. And if we really want to do this right, based on things that I've seen in the past, based on other companies, and based on where we are, here's what I think we need. And so that worked. Fortunately, we have a very open leadership team who listens to new ideas all the time and are supportive of their people. And they said, can you build it? And I said, yes, I can. Yes, absolutely. Not totally knowing what I was getting myself into, but I had a pretty good idea.
That's incredible. And we're going to talk a bit later, like how you position it as well, because I think that's very unique in how you position the gap and got the buy-in for it. And were you the only person at that time that kind of saw that, or did you have other people around you that were also worried about this gap?
No, so transformation for us sits within our enterprise strategy organization. And so my boss, who's the senior vice president, she's not my boss today, but was senior vice president of enterprise strategy, and then at the time, right? And then it expanded to enterprise strategy and transformation. I took it to her and I said, just sense check me, because I'd been working with her, as a partner for 3 years up to that point. And I said, here's what I'm seeing. Am I crazy? Is this what you're seeing too? Help me understand. And so kind of together, we were able to frame up like, hey, here's why it also makes sense in the context of our overall strategy, which I think that was part of the unlock frankly. Had I just gone and said, well, here's what I'm seeing from a, PMO perspective. Here's what we need to do. Here's what the risks are. It may not have been as compelling, but when you frame it up in a way that's like taking a really big step back and looking at the enterprise, understanding the strategy to say, we knew we wanted to do things we couldn't, such as, we announced recently we're going into Mexico. So we're expanding internationally for the first time ever. In order to do that, there are things that you need to be able to do from a capability perspective. And it's basic blocking and tackling. Like you need to be able to take foreign currency, right? You need your systems to be able to speak in foreign currency as well, right? To do financial reporting and understand how it's legally structured and setting up all these entities. And so for us, it was also about tying all of those things to the real strategy of the company and saying, look, if we don't approach it this way, that's okay. But here's what could happen. What could happen is we're going to want to expand internationally, and we won't be able to because we won't have the right capabilities in place. We needed a coordinated and holistic way to really look at what was requiring to be delivered in order to take advantage of some of those growth opportunities. And the transformation office was a perfect kind of centralized, almost air traffic control type function, more than that, but to get some of that coordination in place for the company.
Got it. And how did you have that ability to scope out and see ahead? Because I think that's a challenge for many where that might not happen until afterwards. You have all of this ERP transformation and supply chain transformation, and then like 6 months down the line, you're like, oh, we actually don't have resources for this. So how did you think about scoping it?
Yeah, so for us, a lot of those initiatives were already somewhat either started or somewhat down the path. So I don't want to make it seem like, well, we knew we needed those things and then we did it. It was kind of happening. And so what I saw it happening, and we had this one page which was really great, and I wish I would have brought it for you guys today, but it was it looked like a spider web, right? And it was about how all of the initiatives were connected to each other. And it was about, well, if you change, this in the ERP and you're changing the supply chain at the same time because we're building new buildings, which we did as part of our supply chain transformation, we turned on some new nodes. How are those going to talk to each other? What system are you going to put in the building? Is it going to run on the legacy? Is it going to run on the new? And there are real guest implications to that of like, how are we moving inventory to our stores during that period, right? So there were real things happening where there were like near collisions, I would say, in these transformations because no one was really sitting centrally to manage the dependencies of them. And we had PMOs for each of the discrete initiatives. Right. And we had my team engaged in several of them, but obviously 6 people can only stretch so far. So the communication wasn't quite consistent. It was transparent, but it wasn't always comprehensive because when you're isolated in one initiative, you see what you can. We had nobody kind of seeing across all of them and really saying from a top-down perspective, how are we really going to manage this? And so that's a lot of kind of what the immediate kind of need was when we walked in, was a lot of coordination, transparency, and really kind of management of key critical dependencies.
Got it. So it was a bit of that air traffic control and seeing all these smaller things happening. How do we tie them together and build them out? That's interesting. Yeah. I think this is a good question from Zach to bring in at this point. Zach is asking, having built the transformation office to focus on larger impact initiatives compared to your PMO, how does the transformation office continue to work with the strategy office to identify and select new transformation opportunities that align with that strategy? What's that coordination and relationship after this split out and build?
Well, it's a really good question. And I would say it's a big step back, right? The way our transformation office is structured, and I'll talk about that first, and then Zach, I'll address your question, directly. We have 4 capabilities within our transformation office. The enterprise PMO, which includes IT. So it's the business and the IT PMO capability. We had change management, which was a new capability for Ulta Beauty that we didn't have an approach for historically. We had enterprise portfolio management, which was really kind of that air traffic control function that is working with the PMOs on individual initiatives, right? But also from a holistic standpoint, reporting on the top, call it, and we called our transformation portfolio. Our transformation portfolio was comprised of about the top, 12, 15 initiatives in any given year that drove about 85% of our total spend, right? So it's kind of your old 80-20 rule. And then our fourth capability was value realization. So super important to be able to measure, right, the value of the initiatives as you're going live. And you can confidently say to your board for some of these, couple $100 million investments in some cases, right? Here's what we delivered. We were on track, we were on time, we were on budget, and here's the value we're unlocking as these things are going live. So that's a little bit about how we were organized. So Zach, to your question about, yes, we absolutely built this office to focus on kind of the few versus the all. However, one of the reasons we brought the IT PMO into the transformation office was really, I thought at the beginning, maybe we would only focus on the top few. As we started to get into it, what I realized is, as you're allocating resources against these initiatives, you really have to understand the entire body of work to a degree of what's going on in your enterprise in order to efficiently and effectively do that. And so by bringing in our IT PMO organization, I had then visibility to everything going on in the enterprise and how some of the small projects were connected or were dependencies for some of the larger ones, right, which doesn't always get caught. How resources were working against and stacked against all of these things. And it just gave us a better holistic visibility and chance to manage really the top ones by seeing the whole picture. So that was one very strategic kind of design choice, I would say we made at the beginning of when we looked at kind of building this transformation office. So your second question, how does it continue to work with strategy? Well, a couple of ways. For us, our transformation office and our enterprise strategy team partner really closely during annual planning. So as we are taking our long-term strategy, looking at year one and saying, what are the initiatives we're going to place bets in and invest in for 2024? Having the transformation office have visibility to that and be able to talk to corporate strategy and say, hey, yes, you want to pursue this initiative. Did you know nearly everyone in this function is actually tied up in delivering this other initiative, which is already in flight until July, right? So great, let's invest in it, but let's invest in it in the back half of 2024 so that we can really properly support it, right? So that's kind of how we start to bring the pieces together. And really help inform, corporate strategy as they're developing, like what has to happen. Conversely, we've made choices in the past to pivot away from some things that we've had in flight and to say, hey, you know what? Actually, this might be a more strategic, the landscape has changed, competitive environment has changed, whatever it is, we actually need to deliver this. This is no longer relevant. We're going to have to set that aside and either stop or delay, this other project. So I would say generally in terms of sequence, that time of year is really critical for those two teams to work together. But I would say also, it's pretty constant. And one thing that's helped facilitate that is having strategy and transformation actually sit together in the organization. So hopefully that answers your question.
And there's a quick follow-up from Tara. Did you bring all your IT into the enterprise PMO?
No, not all of IT, just IT PMO. So IT project portfolio program management.
Got it.
Yeah.
Awesome. So let's dive into the pitch a little bit. Like when you walked in with us, like, I think we have a big gap. I need more resources. You grew your team from 6 to 35 people, which is a very large headcount growth. How did you pitch it? How did you type the strategy? Walk us through how you did this.
Yeah, so first I just kind of laid out the fact base, right? I said, here's where we are. We all knew, right? Here are the big initiatives on the table that we're either investing in already and have made the decision or looking to invest in. Here's the team we have and here's what stacks against it. And by the way, when we're talking about really large transformations like an ERP transformation that's going to touch literally every person in the company over a 3-year period, we're going to need more than like one person from my PMO team to do it. So the choices were kind of like, well, one, we could continue down the path of managing each discrete initiative and staffing it the best we could with internal and external resources. Or, I said, if we really want to get the value out of what we're planning to do here, and we really think this is the path, we need a centralized capability to manage this. We had some case studies, right, from other places. We had some consulting partners who were in and around our ERP transformation. So our business partner for our transformation that, we worked with and just said, hey, what do other companies' transformation offices look like? Some of it we took inspiration from, some of it we took from, but ultimately, right, when I sat down and I looked at what were the things that had to happen, it really was, we needed to be more coordinated. We needed to drive a bigger level of transparency in the organization around some of the risks that we were facing and how we talked about the transformation and when we talked about it and who saw it and how we were going to manage through it. And that was both our team, but for the executive leadership team as well. And then we really needed kind of that dependency management. And what I found was, as we were walking through it, I kind of said, well, they totally got it. They got it immediately. And they were like, yep, this is kind of what we felt like was missing, right? As we were looking at this whole body of work, we need somebody to steer the whole thing rather than try and cherry pick executives and put it all, frankly, on the executive team. Because a little bit of what was happening was every initiative also had an executive sponsor too, right? And instead of having somebody serve up to them, here's what the portfolio looks like and how it's tracking every month, they were having to kind of do that on their own. So it also was like, guys, let me take that for you and let me serve it up to you in a way where you're receiving it and can take action on it and make decisions on it versus you're trying to figure out where are things yourself. And that was a little bit of what was happening too. So I think when I was pitching it, it was very much, what's in it for the enterprise, what's in it for the executive team, right? And then why, right? And for me, it really hinged on value. And I think value is a language for executives, really important. And again, these were transformations that were, we've talked about publicly in our earnings calls. So our investors are very aware of some of these investments that we've made, these transformations that we've undertaken. And so the stakes as a publicly traded company for some of these were pretty high.
Yeah, it's very smart to talk about the time you'll be saving them as well, right? Because you're right, everything needs an executive sponsor, and that's very time consuming. They need to get involved, and positioning what's in it for the executive. It's very smart.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes it real, right? Because I don't think they even realize, I think as many executives do, sometimes you're in it and you don't really realize what you're even doing, but you're like, yeah, I am chasing what's going on with this initiative because I'm not directly involved, but I need to know what's going on. Yeah, it would be nice if somebody would just give that to me and then I could take it. And my role as an executive is really to lead through the decision making and help kind of unblock the team, right? And so it allowed them to also really absorb kind of where we were and play the appropriate role, instead of having them have to, like I said, go and figure out where things were.
Yeah, it's you bringing it to them instead of having them spend time running around the entire organization, right? It's
That's
very
right.
smart. And you also speak about telling CXOs the consequences of not setting it up, or like what are the kind of like threats or consequences, like if we don't do this, what will happen?
I mean, I don't think I ever outright threatened our executive team, but what I did say was I said, hey, look, like there are always options in how we approach this. We could choose not to do this. The risk of not doing it are these things. One, we're not, my estimation, right? We're not going to capture the value we set out because we won't have anyone centrally really looking at what are these things delivering. Two, during execution, we know there are dependencies. We're not equipped right now to manage them because no one can even holistically see them, let alone mitigate them. So we're going to feel like we're constantly in a fire drill around things that are popping up that are frankly preventable to a degree, right? There are always things in transformation that pop up, so don't let me mislead you. However, right, like there are things you can do in advance, those start to see that and to start to sequence out like how are we going to do this, right? And so when I started kind of laying out like, well, which one would you rather do? It was like, well, no brainer. And I did go to from 0 to 35. Keep in mind, though, I'd say about half of those resources, and this softened the blow a little bit, like already existed in the organization because I had a PMO team. We had an IT PMO team. They just weren't sitting together and they weren't really working this way. And so it was about kind of taking some existing resources and pulling them into this capability, and then hiring some new talent and some key capabilities that we didn't have, like change management, enterprise portfolio management, and value realization, and making them kind of work together. And so that was also, you know, part of it too, was like, hey, we have got some great talent here. We can pull in and we can leverage for this already. We just need a little bit more in these areas. And so that also made the ask a little bit easier.
Yeah. And then those 4 areas, was that what you went out and hired for, the people that weren't in the org already?
Yes. Yep. So one of the first things I did a few things first because we had to move quickly and in parallel. But one of the first things I did from a team and structure perspective was get really clear on here are the capabilities that we don't have that we need. Here's the starting kind of team structure that we thought we need. And we went pretty light. We focused on kind of hiring the leader first and let the leader then kind of build up the team. I was fortunate in having the luxury of doing it that way. You don't always, but I was really able to do it in a way that brought the right leaders on and empowered them to build their own teams pretty quickly out of the gate.
Awesome. Well, that's great. And then did your pitch also include a few $1 million for consulting firms, or how did you decide what to outsource and what to insource?
Yeah, so the way that we as a transformation office kind of worked, my initial ask was really people. I think I had a couple 100,000 maybe set aside for some consulting budget to help just start to build processes as I was hiring the team, because we needed to move in parallel and so quickly. But really, there wasn't a big dollar ask to fund a transformation office. It really truly was the people. For the initiatives, though, absolutely, right? And so to get at that, I mean, we had business cases. We absolutely engaged consulting partners. So, for example, in our ERP, we have 2 consulting partners. We have a business partner and we have a system implementer. And so, absolutely, we needed to kind of augment our current team, which we did pull some people out of role to fully dedicate on the ERP transformation as well. But we absolutely engage consulting partners, and it has its own business case. So every initiative in our portfolio has a functional business case. It is, you know, what's going to get delivered over what period of time, what's the cost going to take, and we have rigorous ways to kind of measure and monitor. Are we on track? Are we off track? We do reset kind of every year, and every time there's a big kind of what I call like a trigger moment. So, you know, something changes with the scope, we put something in, we pull something out, right? That triggers kind of look again at the business case. The business case is also holistic from a sense of it's both costs and it's benefits. Really important when you're talking about going to the executive team and getting funding. Now, there are initiatives always in transformations that are like, you know what, we just have to do this. There's really not anything incremental we're going to get from it necessarily, but it's an upgrade that we've got to have to kind of keep the lights on or whatever it is, right? That's okay. We usually actually in those cases say, don't spend time building a benefits case if there's not one. Just be transparent and let it kind of stand on its own. We got to do it. But for those that do have benefits and there are choices as to how you approach kind of the implementation or the design of the transformation that you're going through, we absolutely have kind of that balanced cost and benefits view. And we're rigorously measuring the benefits right alongside of the costs.
Yeah, I like that transparency. Like when there are no benefits, also be transparent about that and not trying to make up benefits that might not be
No,
there,
I
right?
mean, it's not worth it, right? Because what'll happen at the end is you're not gonna get benefits. And so why at the beginning, pretend that you are. There are just some things that practically speaking, you have to upgrade from time to time. And it kind of is what it is. And so we don't have a
Yeah,
lot of those. But we have had a couple of them. And so yeah, that's how we approached it.
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. And I want to switch to talking a bit about comms. We did a survey with the Executive Council for Leading Change around what they found the most impactful when driving change last year and what they're planning to do most to have most impact this year. And the result of both of those questions was comms was coming up at the very top of it, and that was what most people were focused on. I know that Ulta has such diverse audience groups to cater that type of change communications to. So how did you cater your approach to the retail staff versus corporate staff, or like different parts of the business for merchandising and stores and other business units? How did you think through that very diverse audience and
Yeah.
segmentation?
Well, it's a good question. And that's really where our change management capability came into play. We knew at the beginning, several of these transformations we were undertaking were touching literally every area of the company. And in order to effectively, identify one, like who are your stakeholders? How is this going to change their, job in terms of process, in terms of tools that they're using? You have to make it real for them kind of where they're sitting. And somebody in a store who's mostly working on the floor with our guests, right, and making sure our guests are taken care of every day, is it their appetite and their ability to ingest the changes that are coming through the store is very different. We did a lot of bite-sized learnings, for example. We did a lot of like very deliberate kind of things in their own language, in their own kind of communication methods and tools and vehicles and all those things, than somebody sitting in corporate where we can say, hey, we're going to take, half a day from this team and we're going to train. Right. So it's a very different approach. And so you have to get really practical really quickly about what's going to work and what's not, and what the constraints are, across kind of your associate base. But that's where for us, a really robust kind of change management methodology, just really making sure we're driving through, hey, preparing people for the change. So making sure they're aware that it's coming, really equipping them with the right things they're going to need on day one, job aids, just simple tools that they can grab as changes are happening. And then making sure that at the end of the day, they're competent, they're adopting the tools that we're putting forward, we're measuring what that adoption looks like, and we're coming behind with additional kind of reinforcement training at the right point through the right communication vehicles. I mean, all things that we spend a lot of time, building for each individual, transformation initiative. But then also overall, I would say one of the things, if you take a step back and you think about, okay, yes, that works on like an individual transformation, but what about explaining to somebody what's going on overall? Like, why are we doing all of these transformational initiatives? So one of the things that we really worked hard on was laying out like our narrative, our corporate narrative of why are we doing this? What is this? And so we actually had 3 horizons of our transformation. The first, which we just are wrapping up right now, hence my transition and role change, right, is really foundational, and the systems, the scale that we're going to need to be able to put growth on top of for the company. The second wave is really about kind of continuing to grow our experiences, focusing on our guest through our different channels. And then the third is, further out, of course, and we called it kind of breakthrough growth. So additional opportunities that we can grow toward. But understanding that corporate narrative and crafting that, and then also doing some really deliberate communications enterprise-wide around why are we on this journey in the first place, also was really important. Because then associates kind of feel like, okay, they know where different pieces then fit in that narrative. And I think that makes it a lot more clear day to day for what the company is really working toward.
Yeah. There's usually that transformation trifecta, right? With change management, communications, and training. And
Yeah.
did you have all of that sitting under your purview, or did you have to collaborate with the comms department and other departments to get that done?
Yeah, so we owned both, right? So we owned our change management framework and methodology and some resource and some change practitioners, so change managers on our team. But we partnered really closely with others in communication, others within enterprise training to make sure we were using the vehicles our associate base was used to. We were leveraging their teams and their expertise, particularly for comms. And you mentioned for our stores, right? We have a whole comms team for our stores because there's so much that happens, right, throughout the day, throughout the week, that we're constantly communicating and updating to our store teams. And so partnering really closely with them also was really critical. And we didn't feel like we needed, I wasn't like, I need to own all of these resources myself, right? They were working really well, and we partner and collaborate really well at Ulta Beauties. So I was like, let's leave them where they are, and let's just make sure we're really tightly connected. And it's worked really well for us.
Got it. And with which methodology did you use?
It's based on ProSci, but it's really our own. So all of our change practitioners are kind of ProSci trained, but it's a bit of a homegrown methodology as well. But our change approach includes, adoption, training, communications, all kind of the typical things, I would say. But we have our own kind of flavor of how we want to walk our teams through it and how it's integrated actually to our strategy, as well as how we work kind of as a transformation office.
Okay, got it. Cool. And on measurement then, like this piece that people always wondering about, like how do you measure it and how did you look at the progress that you made as a team and a function and then communicate those wins and translating those metrics many times to the other stakeholders that you had in the business?
Yeah, so there's layers here, I would say, right? Measurement is super important because I am a big believer. You cannot improve what you do not measure, right? So that's first, you got to have some in place. We had some different ones. So for the portfolio overall, one thing we did on a monthly basis was we actually have a scorecard that every month we would take to the executive team at our monthly meeting and say, here's red, yellow, green, right? Here's how we're tracking. We measured scope, schedule, budget, resources, and value. We also had different measures for value because often value starts when kind of an initiative goes live. So toward the end of the actual kind of project, right? And then value is realized often afterwards. And so we have some different ways to measure value against original business cases like that. But so constant discussion. For us, one of the big opportunities at the beginning was, real transparency of where we were tracking. And I think this is pretty common. We weren't used to talking about things being at risk. And it wasn't that people were hiding it, right? Not at all. It just was like, well, when you started asking questions, you're like, I don't know if that's green. I don't know that it's going as smoothly as we think it's going. And that's okay. But we need to know because then we can do something about it. And we can do something about it before it's, a crisis. So that took a lot of just kind of working through. So that particular measurement. I would say, every area of kind of the transformation office had different metrics then of how effective they were. So PMO, obviously, it is typically kind of your scope, schedule, budget, resources. Overall, how is your program running? Change management, though, we looked at adoption, we looked at training rates, right? So there were certain measures we looked at for every program. And then depending on which one it was, we'd add in a couple more just to fit for purpose, whatever we were trying to drive. Value, as I mentioned, had its own scorecard. And then, I would also say from an overall transformation perspective, we were able to report to the board on a quarterly basis. And every board meeting, I would go in and tell them where we were. And the measurements really were like, are we on track? Are we spending more than what we said we would? Where? And we want to understand it, right? What are some of the big changes in scope that we've agreed to? What does that mean in the context of our overall strategy for the company, right? And so all of those things, it was a constant dialogue of just making sure we were on top of measuring and managing kind of all the risks and exactly kind of where we were throughout.
Yeah. And you had the same scorecard like throughout so people could track the changes over time
Yes.
in that scorecard dashboard.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, because you want to see progress too. And I mean, for red, yellow, green, sometimes it's a little bit arbitrary because there's really no trend. You could be green, you could be red, things happen, right? But for things like value, we were able to track and say, like, we're realizing value. Oh, we're not. What happened? What do we need to do? Like, are we realizing it as a rate? Like, we're going to achieve it over the period of time we said? Are we tracking too slow? What do we do? Do we need, some quick course correction? Is it training because adoption's low? What is it? And so it allows you to really actually see where the action is that you might need to take. And if you're not measuring, you're not going to see it. So that's why we did some of those things.
Yeah, it's very hard to be agile and double down on where you need to double down to if you don't have that data, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
And now that this is behind, like you mentioned, like you're now in a new role, like you managed this successfully, like looking back, if you were to do this entire journey again and set up a transformation office, what would you have done differently?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think starting easy to say, right? But starting even sooner. I mean, I actually think I knew some of this was coming a little sooner than we had put forward because, like I said, some of these initiatives had already kicked off. But I mean, in general, I feel pretty good about what we set up. It's incredibly sustainable as well. So, like, this is now a capability that Ulta will have. Transformation, as everybody here knows, is just, I mean, it's always on now. I think there are always things that things are moving so quickly, right? There are always things companies are going to be doing that intersect other areas of the company, intersect different technologies. And so for us, it also was building it in a way that was sustainable and really bringing people along. So there's not a lot I think I'd do differently yet. I mean, ask me again in maybe like 2 to 3 years, and I'll probably have a different opinion as the world evolves. But I think that's actually the other thing, that as you're thinking about your transformation office and how to bring it to life and the design choices you have, one of the things I told my leadership team, right out of the gate was I said, we're going to evolve. My leadership team looked different less than 2 years later, right, than it did day one out of the gate. Because things change, you learn, and you have to grow with where the company is growing to. And you also have to grow kind of where your transformation is leading you. And so that's really important. The other thing I think that's important is, you don't want to do it too fast. So there is an adage of don't outrun the company. While you may see what's coming, and because you'll see it in the data before anyone else will, sitting in a transformation office, sometimes you do have to wait a little bit and be a little patient to evolve with the company and not ahead of where the company is as well.
Yeah, incredible. So interesting. And this is a good time for everyone to put in your questions and anything that you want to ask Laura, and we'll dive into some Q&A time. We'll start with Krista's question. I'm curious on how long you track value following the transformation, 1 year, 3 years, more?
It depends. It really depends on how long we felt like it was able to be captured. So I'll give you an example. I mean, some of our supply chain investments, particularly new buildings that are quite substantial investments, right? To turn it on and really get kind of the footprint in place, work out all the processes, all those things. I mean, sometimes the realization to value is over like a 5 to 10 year period instead of just 1 to 3. But typically the way we thought about it was we knew kind of what the total value we thought would be delivering. And once we hit that run rate, there's a decision of, do we keep tracking it? Do we feel like it's steady? Or do we feel like we need to keep tracking it until we see kind of that leveling off? Where we landed, and we aligned this as a team and then with our executive team as well, we kind of said, hey, once results are steady for a year, we're going to stop tracking it and we're going to focus our attention kind of elsewhere. So that's kind of how we thought about it, but it varied by initiative.
So once it became a bit of like BAU, then it would be off tracking, because then you knew that it was up and running stably.
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And Anita is asking, were there any tools that you use to help with your tracking, both change impact and program progress?
Yeah. So one of the design choices early that and I actually aligned on is probably my consulting background, but we had to move so quickly. We actually put process in place before we adopted any automation. So we were working in Excel and PowerPoint and all those things with some manual processes for probably a year before we started automating certain things. And the reason was, we had to get things out to the enterprise really quickly because we didn't have this capability. Two, what it allowed us to do was make sure the team really understood what we were doing, see all the detail, sometimes too much, right? But all the detail, work through the process and actually adapt the process before applying tools to it. Over time, some of the tools we used, I mean, absolutely Smartsheet, and there's ways, to automate some things in Smartsheet with workflows that we used for some of our governance processes. And engaging people throughout the business. We use Smartsheet in general just for kind of program management. There are some other tools we use as well. For value, we actually use a homegrown kind of solution based on Power BI. And so for us, Power BI is something that can easily, if you guys know it, integrate with other systems. So eventually we'll integrate with our ERP so we can get kind of live financial results as well. And so that was another kind of design choice. There are other, things out there on the market that are quite good, actually. But we focused first on process. And so that was a choice that we made.
Great. And another question from Tara, what comprises value pre-activation go live for you? Post go live, sometimes there is a lag before value is realized. Pre-activation, is it more readiness type metrics across people, process, tech, and data?
Yeah, pre-go live is really more of kind of almost your typical project program management metrics. It's how are you tracking with, scope, schedule, budget, resources? Do you have a business case? Do you have a value case? Are you updating it, particularly as you're getting close to go live? How confident are we in that? And as you guys know, especially across multi-year transformations, sometimes it is easy to, at the beginning, say, here's our business case and here's why we made the decision. You have to keep it updated. Otherwise, you get to go live and you're like, well, this isn't even relevant anymore. And you're rewriting business cases. And so that was kind of a new discipline for us as well, is like, how do you kind of keep that alive and front and center as a transformation's evolving? So those are some of the things we look at kind of pre-go live. But absolutely, it is also, for the change management perspective, more on the readiness side as well.
Cool. And one thing I'm curious about, Laura, because you mentioned this transparency part of your culture, the collaboration aspect and how transparent, and even things like, if there are no benefits, don't say there are benefits, and just transparent what is working, what is not working. How did Ulta Beauty arrive at that culture? Because I think that culture is so critical to success in transformation, to have transparency. So how did you arrive at that
Well, it was
place?
uncomfortable. I mean, we started in a place where we've always been Ulta Beauty. One of our key values is collaboration. So we've always been a really collaborative culture. So that made it a lot easier. But I think what we didn't always have was like the confidence to really, in an open setting, say, yeah, you know what, my program's red. Here's why. Here's what I need, and here's what we're going to go do. Right. And it's not a difficult conversation to have, but I do think there's if your company is not used to having that conversation out loud, right? There is some fear because you're like, well, how are people going to react? Am I going to get fired? No, you're not going to get fired. Am I going to get yelled at? Am I going to get, right? Like, what's going to happen? Now, Ulta's a very nice place, so none of those things happened. Right. But even so, like, it took us probably a good year and a half to really get leaders comfortable. And frankly, what it took as the leader was I spent a lot of time with our initiative leaders, particularly those on more challenged initiatives, really working with them and saying, hey, here are the definitions we laid out and we all aligned to that said, here's red, yellow, green across these metrics. Here's what you're telling me. Here's where you are. Like, let me help you craft the narrative of how we're going to provide this update. Right. And so once you get that through a couple times, and people then are able to see like it's actually not that scary. And frankly, it's a bit of a relief because then I'm not holding this alone. I've got the support of the executive team, who of course are immediately like, what can we do to help? Do you need more resources? Do you need, right? Like, what do you need? Right. Then there's like this, oh, well, this isn't so scary. Actually, I want to raise my hand in those situations because it'll make sure they know what's going on. It'll also make sure I get what I need to get this back on track. So it took a while for that to develop, but it was a lot of coaching, honestly, on that. And it was a lot of just talking with our executives too, and prepping them the first few times it happened and saying, this program's going to come in and they're going to be read, right? And here's why, and here's what you're going to hear, and here's what they're going to need, and here's what I need you to do in this situation. So it's kind of just making sure everybody is prepared for that conversation the first few times. And now, frankly, I mean, nobody bats an eye, and we have leaders come in and it's like, oh, hey, it's red this month. Here's what's going on. And like I said, here's what we need. Here's what we're going to do about it. And here's when we think we're going to get back to green or back to yellow or whatever it is. But it did take a while to kind of get the organization kind of through that change.
That's incredible, because there's a lot of psychological safety work. And to your point, like it's fear, they're afraid, or am I going to lose my job? Am I going to look bad? Am I not going to get this promotion? And like, it's the politics, visibility, it's so many things playing into it, right? So that's incredible.
Right. And really, I mean, for our executive team, fundamentally, it's like, it's actually none of those things. It's about making sure we're going to be successful. Right. And it's about not creating a higher level of risk than what we need. And frankly, I think we all know when transformations start to turn red, costs add up really quickly on these large ones, right? Especially if you've got consulting partners engaged and you're delayed and all those things. And so, really for the benefit of the enterprise, everyone, because everyone is also motivated by, look, we're a pay for performance culture. If we don't perform, right, we have like other companies, right, like our payments at stake too. So I think it was really creating kind of that framework of everyone's in it together. We're really collaborative anyway. It's okay to raise your hand and say, I actually need help. Like, here's where we are. I need some help. And so now we do that regularly, and it's actually been really great, and it's been a key to our success.
Yeah, definitely. Incredible. And another question is, did you define criteria or process for how new initiatives were included in the transformation as it evolved, or how did you manage the scope?
Yes. So a couple of things there. I mean, one of the things I mentioned was an immediate need was this coordination. And so not only did we, define the transformation portfolio upfront, and we did have criteria, and it was things like size of the initiative, what it was actually touching, so multiple functions, the level of resource support required, and a couple of other things. So we had established criteria of what would put it in kind of that high touch transformation portfolio bucket. There were also things that those initiatives then would receive. There were expectations of what they would have to deliver to the transformation office by way of status reporting, things like that. But there were also things they got. So they got first crack at PMO support. They got first crack at change management support if they needed it from the transformation office. So there were some benefits to being included, which I think was also helpful in making it not feel like you were being sent to the principal's office, but that it actually was a mechanism to help us stay coordinated and actually support these initiatives as well, right? So that was part of it. But one of the things we noticed from the outset as well was we had all these work in flight. We also had a lot of other initiatives that had to get done throughout the year, all of which were kicking off at exactly the same time at the beginning of the fiscal year, because everyone wanted to get done before, holiday blackout period in retail. And what we were noticing was no one was looking at like, well, what resources do you need? Suddenly I had like a manager in supply chain who was working on like 12 initiatives at the same time. And it's like, well, how did that happen? That's not going to work. So what we actually also did was we established kind of an enterprise gating process for new work kicking off. What we were then able to do through that gating process was to say, are you actually ready to start work? Because what we were finding was teams, best intent, right? But wouldn't quite be ready. They'd say they're kicking off, but they wouldn't have the partner in place. They'd say they're kicking off, but they weren't really sure what their budget was yet. So there was some one-page fact sheet, we call it, which was like, hey, are you actually ready to start? Let's take a look together and make sure you're set up for success. Okay, so go through this gate. What the gates also allowed was that from an enterprise perspective, we were then able to prioritize the transformation portfolio initiatives and what had to happen there first. And we were able to sometimes, in some cases, we had to delay some of the smaller initiatives because frankly, they weren't as important. They weren't requiring as much investment. And we had some resource overlaps. And we said from the get-go, we're going to resource these big transformational initiatives first, and then we'll do everything else kind of after that. So we put some specific mechanisms in place so that we were able to govern and manage some of that throughout.
That's smart, because otherwise everyone would want a piece of your office, right? And everyone wants to have the resources.
That's the other thing. Everybody was coming and saying, well, how can I get and it's like, well, I had nothing. I needed something to point back to say, well, why this, why not that? And so that's how some of those came about. Yeah.
Yeah. A little bit of nightclub psychology and change management is always good.
Right. Exactly.
Super. I think we have time for one last question before we're going to wrap it up. Regina is asking, did you support your employees through certain trainings or leadership development during the transition to enable them to cope with it?
Yeah, well, for sure, for like the broader, enterprise in terms of it, just supporting them with all the transformational initiatives happening, absolutely. Even from an enterprise perspective, we invested pretty heavily in just change management. So for our leaders, managers and above, leading through change, what does that mean? How is it different than leading in a normal time where you don't have several transformations in flight at once? What's required of you? How do you talk to your team about it? And then, some more appropriate courses for kind of our junior level resources to give them context as to what was going on. And then in our transformation office, we absolutely also did some leadership trainings. We really focused on communication and executive communication through both kind of slides, but also email, how to write emails that are, answer first. So if the executive has a minute and they just see your first sentence, they know what's going on, right? Things like that we really invested kind of both across the enterprise in the right way, but then for our team in particular as well.
Awesome. Amazing. Thank you so much, Laura. This has been such a good conversation. I'm very impressed with the whole structure that you built it around, like all your design choices and how you think about these design choices. I think for most people, this might be like afterthoughts as well, like after it's happened and the shit hits the fan, then they go, oh, now how do we figure this out? I love how you thought about it beforehand and thought through these design choices, the scorecard, the 4 functions, and the criteria for getting initiatives in. I really love how you're thinking about it overall. This is super insightful.
Thank you. Well, I hope it helps at least get some thoughts going for everyone else in this space, because I think it's a really exciting space. It's a really exciting role, certainly challenging, but I think if you can learn from others and create that network for yourself and for your company, it will pay dividends down the road. So hopefully this has been helpful in doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for spending time with us. We really appreciate it. And thank you for everyone who tuned in and for all your great questions. And we will see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.